I'm Dr. Jorge Navarro. I work with young adults and their families through the transition from high school into the adult world with the goal of making the transition the most effective one possible. I'm also a parent of a young adult who is neurodiverse, and I've helped them transition into the adult world successfully. This video is the second in a series of 3 videos where I go through my personal experiences helping a neurodiverse young adult transition through middle school to high school and into college. And so today we're going to talk about high school. High school is where everything gets real. We finish middle school, we're moving into high school. Independence level is the expectations are super high. And it's not because the work is harder, it's because the expectations just assume that your young adult is ready for things that they may not be ready for yet. And so whenever it came to this new level of expectations, it was a real shift for us. My young adult entered high school, and it wasn't like there was just a switch that was flipped and all of a sudden things got more difficult. But the change was the level of demand that was on them and what was expected on tracking assignments across multiple classes, long-term projects, navigating interactions with different teachers, different sets of expectations, and that level of independence that was expected, and the pulling back of support that maybe more of the teachers used to provide. And it became clear very quickly that the gaps that were manageable in middle school were no longer something that you could work around the same way. High school didn't create a problem, it really just exposed new ones. Organization was still a challenge, follow-through was still kind of inconsistent, and it wasn't because our young adult didn't care, it's just because there were still systems needed to manage all those things, and they really weren't internalized yet. They still needed to be demonstrated and followed up on. And so for me as a parent, the shift was things were getting more complicated, not just for my young adult, but also for me. Because the approaches that worked in middle school, they were not going to work in high school. Where I was driving most of the structure behind the scenes wasn't going to hold up anymore. My young adult really needed to start owning more of this. But they really weren't fully ready to be on their own yet. So we had to figure out how to bridge that gap without taking over, and also not stepping back too far. Looking back, there were a few things that happened during those high school years that I think a lot of parents tend to misunderstand. Things that seem obvious on the surface, but don't actually work the way people expect them to. So in this video, I'm going to talk to you about 5 of the biggest ones that we ran into and how they changed the way that we approach the things that we did at this stage. Number 1, demand doesn't create problems, it reveals them. So the misconception, high school is just harder. They'll figure it out if they try. Our young adult, whenever they entered high school, it wasn't that things suddenly became difficult out of nowhere. It was the expectations changed in a way that assumed that they would have already had the skills in place. And so our young adult was expected to track assignments across multiple classes, be able to handle those long-term projects, navigate working with those different teachers. And it became clear pretty quickly that the organization was still a major challenge. And it wasn't because our young adult didn't care, it's just because they really hadn't fully internalized what we had taught them yet. So high school didn't create the gap, but it definitely presented more opportunities for them to practice. And it exposed any areas that we needed to work on in a way that really couldn't be ignored. Number 2, systems only work whenever they become sharpened. A common misconception is, oh, they can just use a planner or an app, and they should be able to manage things on their own. And the thing is, sure, we had done some of those things previously in middle school, but they had to evolve for high school. And it couldn't just be me managing everything behind the scenes. We shifted into a place where calendars, reminders, weekly check-ins became something that we worked on together. And we had a routine that was expected where we would use those calendars, where we would use those checklists, where we knew we were going to meet every single week to follow up on how things were going until she got it on her own. And it wasn't a clean transition. There were times whenever it was really easy for our young adult to stay on top of things, and then there were times when they drifted. But over time, the goal wasn't just to have a system in place, but it was to have our young adult actually use them and be invested in using them. Number 3, motivation is personal, not social. So a misconception is that your young adult will be motivated by grades, peer pressure, wanting to keep up with other people. But one of the biggest realizations was that our young adult wasn't motivated the same way that other teenagers were. They didn't really care about keeping up with peers. They didn't really have a strong drive in that area. What worked was whenever things were immediate, concrete, and tied to our young adults' interests. And our young adult definitely had interests that were probably a little bit less mature than some of her peers, but that's where she was at, and so that's where we needed to really focus on attending to understanding her motivations. Access to technology, creative outlets like art, sometimes were the only things that she cared about. And once I understood that, I stopped trying to force motivation that didn't fit and started working on what actually resonated with our young adult. That shift made a significant difference in how she engaged with her work and what type of responsibility she took onto herself. Number 4, self-advocacy doesn't just happen. It's something that has to be trained. A misconception is if a young adult needs help, they'll ask for it. It's just common sense, right? But telling her to speak up for herself wasn't enough. She needed to know what actually advocating for yourself looked like. And so we spent time talking through situations, writing out what she might say, even role-playing conversations before she had them. In environments where she felt supported, she was more willing to self-advocate. There were definitely teachers that were more approachable in that area. But in other situations, our young adult hesitated, and so it was inconsistent. But the thing is, it was all part of a process, and over time, she began to understand how to ask questions, clarify expectations, communicate when something wasn't working. That wasn't something that our young adult did naturally. She didn't just step into it and own it. It was something that we built deliberately and had lots of opportunities to practice. Number 5, if you don't change your role, you potentially will hold your young adult back. The misconception is, the more I stay on top of everything, the better they'll do. And one of the hardest parts of high school wasn't what she had to learn. It was how I had to change as a parent. There are moments when I could see that she was capable, but stepping in too quick would take away the opportunity to let her figure it out. At the same time, completely stepping back wasn't realistic either. I had to learn when to step in, when to let things play out. Low-risk mistakes became part of the process. Natural consequences started doing more of the teaching. My role shifted from managing everything to helping her think through decisions and reflecting on the outcomes. The shift wasn't automatic. It required constant adjustment. When I think back to high school for our young adult, the biggest shift wasn't just what she had to do. It was also what was expected of her and how much she was able to actually carry the responsibilities on her own. Because this stage, things start to matter in a different way. Grades matter, decisions matter. Opportunities start to open up or close based off of decisions that are made or what's happening. Underneath it all, what really determines how things go is something that most people aren't really measuring clearly. It's not just academic performance. It's things like how well can your young adult manage systems without constant prompting, and how they respond whenever things start to slip, and whether or not they can follow through when no one is watching. How much ownership they're actually taking. Because high school is where the shift begins from being supported to being more responsible. And that transition isn't automatic. Some areas move forward, some areas stay dependent. Some drift, some need to be rebuilt again. And whenever you're in it, you don't always recognize where your young adult stands across all of that. That is why I created the transition-focused mindset. It's a readiness assessment that helps you look beyond the grades and get a clearer understanding of where independence is already, where it's developing, and where more support is still needed. And so this is an assessment that you can go online and take. The link is in the description, and it will help you because in high school, preparation isn't just getting ready for college or technical school. There are so many other facets that you need to be mindful of, and this assessment helps you look at all those different areas. And it's really easy to misread what's happening because we don't always understand the totality of what's expected for the future.